Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. Feel free to start introducing yourselves in the chat as you come in. We'll get started as people trickle in from the waiting room. I see Marsh from Oregon. Hi, Marsh. Kayla from our NLIHC team. I see Jan. Lois from Florida. I see Sean and Naya from Idaho. And we're starting to get names coming in too fast for me to keep up with. Welcome, everyone. We'll wait another minute or so as people continue to pour in from the waiting room. Seeing some more California, Virginia, Texas, Michigan, Kansas, Ohio. Got a big swath of the country covered here. All right, I think we're starting to slow down from the waiting room a bit. So we'll go ahead and dive right into things. Welcome, everyone. My name is Courtney Cooperman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the project manager of NLIHC's Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. And I'm very thrilled to welcome you all to the third webinar in our Homes, Our Votes 2024 webinar series, which is Voter Registration 101. Feel free to keep introducing yourselves in the chat as we're getting started, and of course throughout the webinar. And we can go to the next slide. Great, so the first step to closing the voter turnout gap between low-income renters and high-income homeowners, which we often talk about, is to close the voter registration gap. While fully 82% of people with household incomes above $100,000 were registered to vote in 2022, just 50% of people with incomes below $20,000 were registered. But all of us on this webinar are the people that have the power to close that gap. And we have some fantastic panelists today who will share tips for registering voters in your community and some specific tools and partnerships that you can leverage to do this effectively. So first we'll hear from Chyann Sapp, who's the campaign director of National Voter Registration Day, about best practices for planning a National Voter Registration Day activation and tips for registering voters. We'll then hear from Andrew West at Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, who will share lessons learned from registering voters in Colorado and key considerations for registering voters experiencing homelessness, which I know is something that there's a lot of interest in, and we talk a lot about on this webinar series. Finally, I'll give a little bit of a tour and present some use cases for TurboVote, which is our new online voter engagement platform. So you'll get a little bit of an inside look into that and how you can use that in your campaigns. But first, we can get into a few housekeeping items on the next slide. First, this webinar is being recorded. We will distribute the recording and some keynotes in our Friday email newsletter, which is called The Connection, and the recording will be posted on the NLIHC YouTube channel shortly. Second, I believe we have our closed captioning on. If we don't have it on yet, we will have that up and running very soon. Also, for questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A feature rather than the chat to ask questions. With so many people on the call, it makes it a lot easier to sort through if you ask questions in the Q&A. But of course, please continue to have conversations and exchange ideas in the chat. We love seeing all of that dialogue. And last but not least, Our Homes, Our Votes is 100% nonpartisan, meaning that we don't endorse or favor specific candidates or political parties. Our goal is building the voting power of low income renters so that we can hold all elected officials accountable to prioritize housing justice. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our first panelist, Cheyenne.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Courtney, thank you so much for having me and to the entire Our Homes, Our Votes team. I'm so excited to be speaking to all 270 of you. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I'm so excited to chat about National Voter Registration Day, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. It will be on September 17th this year. So we are going to use this time to tell you about what the plans for the day look like, give you a little bit of background about signing on to becoming a community partner, what that all means for low-income voters, because obviously this is a huge election year. So we have a great opportunity to reach low-income voters in a more pivotal way, and talk to you about how you can get involved. We will be taking questions in the end, so be sure to keep those handy, but let's kick it off. We can go to the next slide, please. So what is National Voter Registration Day? So of course, many of you have probably heard about National Voter Registration Day at this point. It is the kickoff to the civic holidays. It starts in September and we run all the way through November for Get Out the Vote and Election Day. So National Voter Registration Day, again, will be held on Tuesday, September 17th of this year. It's a completely nonpartisan civic holiday to get Americans registered to vote, update their statuses, and get them vote ready. So there's a huge educational component as well as the outreach. Overall, it's a coordinated day of events to share those registration opportunities before the state deadlines, which is why it's usually held the second or third week of September. And this year, the holiday has been listed as one of the White House's 3 days of promoting days of action around voting. So it's a really exciting year for us in general, with it being a federal election year, but also it's a great opportunity for us to highlight the local elections that happen every single year, the state elections, and really pull in voters and get them engaged around the election, since many of them will be voting this year in the presidential. Next slide, please. So our goals this year are big, of course, because it's a big year, but we have already exceeded our goal of signing on over 100 premier partners, which are made up of national organizations as well as corporations. So we are so excited about that. We have Google and Meta and many more signed on to support the holiday. So we're really excited about that, especially because technology is going to be a big topic this year, and the use of technology. Our goal this year also is to sign on about 4,500 community partners, and those are made up of local organizations like yourselves who are doing this work and meeting your constituents every single day, talking to them, having one-to-one engagement and peer conversations. Those are the community partners, and those are who we focus on supporting most throughout the National Voter Registration Day season. So our goal this year is to sign on about 4,500 of you to make sure that you receive all the resources that you can to promote National Voter Registration Day. And then lastly, we're hoping to register about 750,000 new voters on September 17th. I know that's a very ambitious goal, but it's a big year. And we also include in that folks who are updating their voter registration status, which is a really important piece of the electorate. Next slide, please. So local organizations as yourselves play a huge role in voter turnout, as you already know. So I included a chart here because we actually just did this nonprofit power study from 2021 to 2022. We saw that there was a 10 percentage point increase in voters engaged by nonprofits, and that is really significant. It was a 12 percentage point increase for voters of color who were engaged by nonprofits. So this is really showing that local organizations are the key to this outreach because you guys are a trusted voice. They are engaging with you on a daily basis or weekly basis, but more regular than they are with their election officials. So they trust you and they know that you're going to give them solid resources. You're not going to lead them astray, and they will trust that if you're telling them to register to vote or check their voter registration status or go out and vote, that there's a reason why. So we really lean into local organizations to help because this is your strength. So thank you guys for committing to this work and continuing to push it forward. Next slide. So for community partner expectations, we keep these very loose because this is really important for us to make sure that you guys feel empowered. But overall, we just require that you guys be nonpartisan. So refrain from any conversations around candidates or political party leanings, be inclusive, be aware of your state's voter registration laws, be non-transactional, and of course, have fun. National Voter Registration Day is a very exciting day. You'll probably see a lot of celebrity engagement this year, as well as local organizations posting about their voter registration drives. So be creative and have a great time. Next slide. And in terms of planning your activation, I know this is something that many of you are starting to think about, like what does your voter engagement plan look like for this year? And I'm sure Our Homes, Our Votes, the webinar series is a fantastic resource to kind of jolt that education and get your ideas moving. So if you're planning an activation around National Voter Registration Day, number one, you want to start by signing up to become a 2024 community partner. This will put you on track to receive the printed posters and stickers. So those are the ones that you probably see everywhere. I just included them. The poster for 2024, you guys are getting a sneak peek of the design since it just is launching actually tomorrow morning. So you guys have the first look, but we are able to send these posters to you. When you sign up to become a community partner, you'll be able to submit a request for the numbers of posters and stickers that you want mailed to you. So you start there, but you can also download the poster digitally and start to share that as well. Step two would be make a plan to participate. So like, what does this mean for you? What does the GOTV season and voter engagement season look like for you? When does it start? And as you put together a plan, you can figure out what your strengths are and lean into those strengths. So maybe that means, since you're speaking to a lot of low-income voters, maybe that means doing in-person community events or making sure that you have voter registration at every single one of your events. That can also mean leaning into social media outreach or e-blasts and keeping that message built within that messaging in the e-blast and social media as well. Step three would be to make sure that you have like a social media plan so that you are promoting it. This can also include just kind of posting the posters all around. And then lastly, step four, celebrate the day on September 17th. So however you determine is your greatest strength, lean into that and then have fun on the day. Next slide. And ways to engage voters. So I included here some ideas that can kind of stretch across many of your strengths with talking to low-income voters. So number one, you want to make sure that you're sharing voter registration links and cross-promoting National Voter Registration Day resources. You can create your own graphics that include your logo, that include the Our Homes, Our Votes taglines, whatever you feel is going to be most impactful and will resonate with low-income voters. Also tailor that messaging. That's the best way to kind of promote the day. Some other ideas include providing transportation assistance to helping voters get to the poll on election day. So registering to vote, they can do in person with you, or they can do it online, or you can fill out a paper form, but also think about what GOTV looks like on election day. You can also collaborate with other organizations that serve the same voters and integrate voter registration services, provide assistance in actually completing the voter registration form. There can be a lot of questions about those. And then also educate yourself on how to fill out the absentee ballot. And then lastly, you can organize peer-to-peer outreach where representatives from your organization kind of use word of mouth to get the word out about NVRD and GOTV as a whole. Next slide, please. And I also wanted to include here some compelling talking points for low-income voters. I used to do this work in New York City, specifically with youth voters, and it was really important that you helped them bridge the connection between why this is all important and what their daily lives look like. That's sometimes a difficult conversation. So why this is so important this year is because it's a federal election year and there's tons of attention on it. It's also a great opportunity to uplift local elections, state elections, and why all of this matters. So some of the talking points include vote, to have a say in shaping policy that directly impacts your life. So as you're talking to low-income voters and voters in general, make sure you're helping them to make correlations between their everyday lives and voting. So that can be examples like, school funding or cleaning up the community or reducing gun violence. Bring up those types of topics so that that can help them to bridge those connections. You can also make sure to amplify your voice through voting and advocate for your rights and interests. So that's a pivotal way to make sure that your voice is heard through voting. You also vote to hold election officials accountable and demand proper representation, especially for your local community. You vote to secure access to essential resources. So that's also community related to make sure that your community does not get overlooked. Especially as low-income voters. Vote to protect and expand your voting rights for yourselves and future generations. So this is a great talking point because obviously voting rights are always on the chopping block. So you're voting to make sure that they stay in circulation. And then lastly, vote to ensure that progressive policies as a whole and equitable opportunities continue to be upheld. So these are some great talking points. Voters may have lots of questions, but it's also just really important for you to have these types of talking points on deck so that you can help them, again, make those connections and why this is all important. And last slide, I believe. So I just wanted to include also here some resources for you. So you can always look at the nationalvoterregistrationday.org website for resources. Thank you, Lindsay, for dropping the partner form here. Really appreciate it because you can sign up using that link that's in the chat now. We're holding a webinar on June 18th at 2 p.m. to talk specifically about National Voter Registration Day. That includes some grant support, so you have an opportunity to learn about funding, as well as the swag distribution, which includes the posters and stickers. And then we'll see you on September 17th. I'm so excited to have you guys as part of our community. We're very excited to continue to have Our Homes, Our Votes as one of our key partners. And thank you guys so much for the work that you do. Last slide. That's all. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Chyann, for all the incredible information and all of the support that National Voter Registration Day provides throughout the election cycle. And I know that there's so much great stuff in store this year. I know we've gotten a few great questions for you, so we'll keep those in the Q&A and we'll answer them collectively after our next two presentations. So thank you so much. And with that, I will pass it to Andrew.
Thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you, NLRC, for having me on today. My name is Andrew West, and I'm the Policy Associate with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. And I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of our voter registration work. Let's see, next slide here. So I'll provide a bit about CCH and the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless because I do think it's helpful to give a bit of an overview of what we do and what my role is within the organization. But our mission is to work collaboratively toward the prevention of homelessness and creation of lasting solutions for people who are both at risk of or experiencing homelessness throughout the state. We are primarily a direct healthcare and housing services provider. And my role is actually more focused on the advocacy side. So I do a lot of work at the local, state, and federal level advocating for policies that would benefit people experiencing homelessness, as well as a lot of smaller one-off projects like we're actually involved in the Denver Basic Income Project and voter registration as well. So yeah, a bit more of the overview of what we do. We operate 23 properties throughout the state and serve over 4,000 households on any given night. We also operate a federally qualified healthcare center where we provide services to almost entirely all of our patients are low income, and we provide care to over 17,000 people annually, along with supportive services like case management, housing support services, employment services, and advocacy work, which is what I do, and advocating for bills at the state level, federal level, and a lot of local policy as well. So that's a bit of overview of what we do. In terms of get out the vote efforts, our efforts are concentrated in a couple different ways. The main thing we do is voter registration tabling events where we'll set up a table, usually at our Stout Street Health Center. That's really important because it allows us to meet a lot of our clients where they're at. A lot of people are just at the health center waiting for an appointment with the dentist, so they need to see someone to get their vision checked out, and they come by our table and say, "Oh, what's this? I'd like to hear more about voting and see if I can get registered today." We also go to our different properties and set up a table in the lobby there just so it's accessible to people. And we also promote voter registration through our internal and external channels. So one of the nice things about my team is that we manage both public policy and communications. So I'm very plugged in to our channels for social media if we want to share things out, and also sharing things internally with staff. Obviously, our case managers, people that work directly with clients, are super critical for getting voter information to our clients. And I want to shout out the Community Resource Center, who we get a lot of support from through their participation project. They provide a lot of great training for our staff and volunteers, as well as resources and support throughout the process. So we really couldn't do this work without the CRC. So here's a little good photo of some of the work that we do, and you can see our table at the South Street Health Center. We offer paper registration, online registration, and we take pledges to vote as well. The main way that we get people registered to vote, I will say, is through the online registrations. We found those to be very helpful. Usually we set up with a couple iPads as well, and we're connected to the internet. The online registrations are especially helpful because through the Colorado Secretary of State site, you can check to see if you have an existing registration and need to update that. Rather than having to go through that whole paper form and fill everything out, you can just check and see if you're already in there and just update your address, update your party information, whatever that might be. And we try to make it as accessible as possible. We set up right by the front doors at the health center, right where people are hanging out. We like to have some snacks available. We have pens. So people a lot of time will just come check it out. Obviously, a lot of our folks are experiencing literal homelessness and can definitely benefit from a snack. So we want to make sure that we're accessible as possible, that we come to people. And obviously, as we heard about earlier, it's really important that we remain nonpartisan because we are a nonprofit. We can't take any stances on any candidates. Some of the resources we provide include things like key election dates. So this is actually an image of our physical form that we hand out, and you'll see that we have copies in both that are in English and Spanish. So we want to make sure that this is accessible to all folks that are coming by our center. We also have information on how to vote by mail. A lot of people don't really understand the voting by mail process. It varies a lot from state to state, obviously. And people have questions about, is voting by mail secure? How do I do that? Where do I return my ballot? And we provide all of that information right there. And we want to stress to people that it is really an easy process, and we can help you out with that. And we want to make it as accessible as possible. We also have links to further resources in case we can't answer everything. We want to make sure that people know where they can get their questions answered. And lastly, we provide a lot of information on voting with a criminal record. And that's something I'll talk about a little later in the presentation, but that's especially important when we're working with folks. So as I was preparing this presentation, a couple things that I kept noting over and over again. As I said, I know the voter laws can vary a lot state to state. And Colorado is actually a good model in a lot of different ways. One, in that people can register to vote up until and including the day of election. So if you show up to a polling location in person, you can get registered on that site. So it's really accessible, and all registered voters receive a mail ballot. So we have automatic mail ballots. So if you're registered, you'll receive that ballot in the mail, and then polling locations will open. I think it's usually about a month before election day, and you have plenty of time to either go to a polling location to vote early, or you can drop your ballot at a drop box throughout the city. Denver in particular has a lot of different drop boxes. I've got one at the rec center that I go to, so I'll drop it off on my way to the gym, and I'm usually one of the first people to vote. We also have a couple policies in place that make it easier for unhoused folks to vote, and people with criminal and legal involvement can also vote. So make sure that's really accessible. And there was a law as well that was passed in 2019 that provides for automatic voter registration at the DMV offices. So when you go to a DMV, you can get registered to vote. And we're also working on automatic voter registration for Medicaid applicants as well. That's something we're working on the rollout for that, but that's a policy that we would like to see implemented in Colorado. So in terms of eligibility, the main things that we're looking for are that you have to be a US citizen, you have to be 16 years old to register to vote. Obviously, you can't vote until you're 18, but you have to also be a Colorado citizen for at least 22 days leading up to the election, and then complete an application with the signature. Obviously, that voter registration form has to be filled out for it to be valid and get you registered to vote. And in Colorado, you can vote if you have a criminal legal history, as long as you're not currently serving a sentence of imprisonment for a felony. So that means if you're in a jail currently and you have a misdemeanor charge, you can still vote. If you have a felony charge in the past that you've completed, you can also vote. So that's something that we get a lot of questions on. I will say that and the mail voting and just questions about the process are the two main things we get. We know that there is certainly a connection between people experiencing homelessness and people who have been criminalized and have involvement with the criminal legal system. And because there are a lot of places where you can't vote if you have that sort of involvement, people are a bit hesitant to engage with the process and have a lot of questions on that. That being said, there are still a lot of barriers to voting. We have the automatic mail ballots, but a lot of folks have difficulty with having a stable mailing address. And again, there's just a lot of confusion about the process. We try to make it easy, but this is still not the easiest thing to do, especially if you haven't voted in a while. If you're a younger voter, this can be a difficult process to engage with. Colorado makes it easier by having mail ballots, but difficulty getting to polling sites, lack of transportation. Obviously, election day is on a work day for a lot of folks, and it can just be hard to get to the polls. There are also a lot of language barriers for folks who don't have English as their first language. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of misconceptions about who is eligible and who is not eligible to vote. So we're trying to break down these barriers as much as we can through this process, but there are still some challenges. So for people who are unhoused and looking to vote, we want to stress that yes, you are able to vote. There are two different things that being unhoused can complicate, two different sections of the voter form. So the first is a permanent address, and that's just to determine what you're voting for. So to determine who your House representative is and what election you'll be voting for example. And that's what we say to folks, that it doesn't need to be a place where you get mail. They're not going to send anything there. We just need to have a place so we know who you're voting for and what your area is. So for a lot of folks, if they're staying at a shelter, we can list that shelter. If there's a friend's house that they're staying at, we can list that friend's house. But that's the permanent address section on the form. And I'll show you the form, I believe, on the next slide. And then the mailing address is somewhere where they can get that mail-in ballot. And again, that doesn't have to be a place that they go to very often. For us, there's a shelter pretty nearby our health center that a lot of folks use to receive mail, and they've got a box there where they can get mail dropped off. So they need those two components, but people who are unhoused can vote, and we want to ensure that they know that they are able to vote. Next slide here. Thank you. So this is an actual copy of our voter registration form. I think this is helpful to look at, but you'll see that section, the address where you live. And Colorado has this section where you can click the checkbox saying, I am homeless. This is a location that I regularly return to, and I provided a separate mailing address. Those two things can be the same. You can get mail where you live, obviously, and you can have an address to mail the ballot. That can all be the same thing, but they do parse it out a bit, so that's a bit more accessible to folks. And I think having that checkbox also makes people feel seen. They see that, okay, this form realizes that there are people like me who do want to vote and are able to vote still. So good thing that Colorado does. And next part on voting with a criminal record, this is a question that we get a lot of questions about this, and we have handouts for people as well. I will say that those handouts are very helpful because it has a bit of an authority to it to get that piece of paper that says, okay, I can vote. And you can vote if you have any of these different types of criminal involvement. But what we actually say, and this is just on the next slide here, is that as long as you are not serving a term of imprisonment for a felony, you are able to vote. So if people are at our health center in person, if they're standing in front of us, that means they can vote as long as they're not serving a sentence. The only tricky thing is if they're on Department of Corrections inmate status and are living at a outside of a prison on some sort of inmate status. But we really don't see that very often. And oftentimes people know what that status is. So Colorado is definitely a leader in this regard, and we work with the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition as well on those materials, and they do a lot of great education going into prisons, connecting with people who are incarcerated, but letting them know they are still able to vote. We also do a lot of voter registration at partner locations. So we have lots of clients that we are able to access at the health center. You don't have to necessarily be a client of ours and be well connected to the Coalition for the Homeless to be at the health center. So it can be a lot of folks who are living in one of our properties who see a psychiatrist, for example, at our health center and are there pretty regularly. There are also a lot of people who drop by once and we maybe don't see them again. So that health center is a great point of access to make sure that we're really bringing voter registration to folks. But that doesn't work for everyone. So we want to make sure that we're accessing people who are experiencing homelessness at different partner locations throughout the city. The Denver Rescue Mission Shelter is one that we've done before. We've been to a few of their sites, and we're actually there. Last year we were at our health center, but the previous year we held our National Voter Registration Day event at the Denver Rescue Mission. And we reached several dozen voters, got a lot of people registered to vote, and that was a great way to connect to folks. Denver also has a safe outdoor spaces program where people experiencing homelessness can get temporary shelter and have a bit more privacy. And we've gone to a few of those sites as well. The Urban Peak Shelter serves youth who are experiencing homelessness, and we've brought voter registration to them as well. And I'd be remiss to not mention that we have a lot of great volunteers who signed up for a lot of voter shifts, and we really couldn't do all this work without the support of our great volunteers as well. So a bit of our successes, I'll brag for a little bit here. In 2023, we did that National Voter Registration Day at the South Street Health Center. We reached a lot of people just providing information, but got about 24 voters registered. And we also had our 10th anniversary event at Fort Lyon. So like we just heard in the previous presentation, making sure that whenever we have events that we bring voter registration along and let people know that, hey, while you're hanging out here, you want to take a minute just to check your voter registration or get more information. And that's a way that we're able to reach a lot of voters as well. And we shared a lot of information on voting on social media and internal channels. So we have an internal update that goes out to our staff members every week. And we provide information on voting there and how they can get connected if they have any questions, that they can get in touch with us about voting, and sharing things externally. So on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, on X, making sure that everyone has that information that they need. And in 2022, we did a bit of a larger push. Our goal for the contacts was 100, and we actually hit nearly 500 contacts. We had 486 contacts. So that includes paper registrations with that physical form, people who have done the pledge to vote card that we turn in as well, and then online registration that's linked to our CCH account and online pledges as well. So a lot of different ways that we engage voters. And hopefully in 2024, we're going to do a big push as well. So we hope to even beat this number this year. So one thing that I'll mention that has been very successful is just both meeting voters where they're at and connecting with them on issues that matter. I think a lot of our folks have a lot of, unfortunately, negative experiences with systems and politicians, elected officials. They feel like people oftentimes don't represent them and what they stand for and the things that they need. And So the politicians and the elected official, all of those races for candidates can feel a bit out of touch sometimes, or it can feel hard for people to access. Um, and in 2022, we actually had a few ballot measures that we were letting people know about. We did take a position, but obviously we don't encourage people to vote any particular way. But letting people know that, hey, Proposition 123 is a permanent funding source for affordable housing. So this is something that would go to homelessness programs, homelessness resolution, and building housing through the state. Um, a lot of times, folks don't know that we have all these ballot measures, and that they can weigh in through the voting process. So I think beyond educating people about what their rights are, how they can vote, but letting them know what sort of things are even on the ballot. And sometimes people say, I don't really like any of these politicians. No one stands for me. And we try to hear people out. Don't give any information on candidates, but we say, yeah, I hear that can be frustrating. But I encourage you to check it out more and look at some ballot measures as well, because a lot of these things might affect you. Well, next slide here. And I'll close out with a couple keys to success. I've talked about meeting voters where they're at. So making sure that the voting process is really accessible to them, that they have ways to register where they're at. So they don't have to go anywhere, complete a lengthy process. Want to stress that it's quick, it can be easy, and we're right here. We can help you right now. Connecting on issues that matter to them, letting people know that this is a really important way to make their voices heard while also remaining nonpartisan. And then providing clear information with clear materials. We have a lot of handouts that people can take with them. And that's important for people get key dates, knowing how to register, where those locations are, and that sort of thing. And the last two things are just promoting awareness, even if people don't register to vote that day, because sometimes you do have to know when to let people go. Making sure that people have more awareness after they leave than they came with. And the last thing is listening. I think it's really important to just listen to our clients and listen to their experiences and hear what works for them, what doesn't, and how we can be supportive to them in the process. So thank you all so much, and I'll be here to take questions.
Thank you so much, Andrew. These are really fantastic tips, and I think the success that Colorado Coalition for the Homeless has had in reaching voters and registering voters is a testament to how helpful these tips are, and that we should all live by them. So for a few minutes, I'm just gonna walk through one of our new tools that we're sharing with our network to promote voter registration and information. I think this is something that dovetails really well with the activities that Chyann and Andrew talked about, in terms of kind of different channels for reaching voters. And this is a tool that you can use in any context, as well as for your own voter registration and information. So we can go to the next slide. This is our brand new TurboVote platform. You can find it at ourhomes.turbovote.org. And this is an online portal where voters can register or update their voter registration, check their registration status, find nonpartisan election information for their community, and sign up for nonpartisan email and text election reminders. The portal is bilingual with English and Spanish options. So if you go to that URL, it'll show up in English, but you can click Spanish on the bottom of the page. My colleague Hillary just dropped the link to that in the chat, and we'll pull up a QR code in a few minutes that has the link as well. So that image on the slide is what it looks like when you go to ourhomes.turbovote.org. And then I'm just going to kind of give a tour of what happens when you interact with various features on the site. We can go to the next slide. So one of the key features of TurboVote is that you can use it to register to vote. You can click that option and then input some of that information that is necessary for registering to vote. Depending on your address and what state you're in, the flow of that and the questions will look a little bit different because the process can vary state to state, but it'll channel you to the right place depending on what state you're in. We can go to the next slide. So you'll have two options in most cases. Almost every state has the option to register to vote online. We can drop a link in the chat with some specifics about state laws regarding registering to vote online. But in the vast majority of states, you'll have the option to register either online, which I know Andrew talked about being very effective, or by paper. And TurboVote gives you the option to do both. So we'll see what happens when you click I'll register online. We can go to the next slide. So when you select online, you'll then get linked outward to your official state online voter registration application in a separate window. So you're not completing the full process through TurboVote, it's just making that link really accessible and getting you to that place. But then once you complete the process and submit your registration on the state website, you'll want to go back in and select that you completed it. So it will give you those final reminders and any next steps. Alternatively, you can select paper and it will ask some questions that it will use to pre-populate a PDF of a voter registration form. So it makes that process of filling out a form a little bit easier. And we can go to the next slide. So you'll get this pre-filled PDF. Some of the items that TurboVote does not collect because they are more sensitive must still be filled out, like your state ID number and last four digits of your social security number. So you'll print it out, fill in those pieces, sign the form, and mail it in. TurboVote doesn't automatically transmit this PDF to your election office, so you have to make sure you go through that last step. We can go to the next slide. TurboVote also allows you to check your registration status. So let's say you know you've registered to vote at some point, but you can't remember if it's at your current address, or you haven't voted in a while and you're not sure if you are actively registered. You can put in your information and it'll cross-check it with a national database called TargetSmart. So it'll tell you if they can confirm that you're registered at your current address. I will note that TargetSmart is not up to the minute. It only gets updated when states send in their voter rolls. But we can go to the next slide, you'll see what happens if it can't find you in there. It'll tell you maybe it's because you registered recently and your state hasn't submitted its information yet. Then you can click outwards to check directly with your state directory and see if they have a record of your voter registration. Or you might not be there because you may not have updated your registration since moving to a new place, or perhaps changing your name or something like that. So then if you realize, actually, I'm not registered with my current information, you can go back in and register to vote with that process that we just walked through. And we can go to the next slide. There's also the option to pre-register to vote for anyone between 15 and 17 years old. You can fill in your information and you'll get reminders when it's time to get registered and complete that process. We can go to the next slide. Another really, really important feature of TurboVote, I think one of its best features, is that you can sign up for election reminders by email or text. I promise this is not something that's going to spam you. I do not like getting unnecessary emails and texts, and I find that you only get the information when there's really key updates, maybe an upcoming deadline. And what's really critical is that isn't just for the presidential election. It's not even just for the primaries. It's for anything down to the hyper-local school board level. So I think getting these reminders really empowers people to participate in elections at every level. And, the information isn't always as accessible, the reminders aren't always as present, but with TurboVote, you're going to know about every single election, which we know that every level of elections is really critical for housing policy in your communities. We can go to the next slide. You also, let's say you know that you're registered at your current address, you can still use TurboVote for finding voter information. So you'll see upcoming elections listed in your voting hub. You can either enter your address or click on your state to access this hub. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see there's a lot of information in there. It's all down to the local level, registration deadlines, voting deadlines, and as the election gets closer, you'll even get information like where to find your ballot drop box if you're in a place that has drop boxes. This page will look different depending on what state you're in and how close you are to the election, but it's always a place where you can refer to for that official information about registering and voting. We can go to the next slide. So that's what TurboVote looks like. Again, I highly encourage everyone to use it both for your own registration and information, and also for these types of voter registration drives that we've been talking about today. If you're interested in making TurboVote part of your voter outreach, you can embed it on the website. You can reach out to me and I'll get you that code for the embedding. You can post it on social media. There's some good social media posts that are samples from the TurboVote website. We can also help out with that. You can print out a TurboVote QR code and post it around on flyers. You can have it at an event if you're tabling. You can do door-to-door canvassing, maybe have an iPad with TurboVote on it. You can send out an e-blast with the link to TurboVote. If you're having a conference or an event, you could put it up on a big slide in the background or print it out on a poster. And that's just a sampling of ways to use it. If you are using TurboVote in other creative ways that we don't have listed here, please let me know so we can uplift that and recommend it in future settings. We can go to the next slide. So that's the end of the TurboVote presentation. Again, that's ourhomes.turbovote.org. Please check it out. My colleague Hillary also just dropped a link to some more details on strategies for promoting TurboVote. That includes some sample social media. And with that, I'm going to bring back all of our panelists and we'll take some questions. I know we've gotten some really fantastic questions over the course of the webinar. I will start with, we've had a few really good questions from Tiffany about reaching people where they are, as well as needing voter ID. And I will just say that voter ID can be a major obstacle to casting a ballot. The rules by state differ, but that is also a place where organizations like people on this call can step in and provide assistance. And Vote Riders is a really great organization that provides really kind of deep voter ID assistance, helping people overcome those barriers. And we will have a representative from Vote Riders on our next webinar on June 3rd. But Chyann or Andrew, do you want to speak a little bit more to the point of meeting people where they're at and kind of like going out to places where, you know, people might not be seeking out information, but when you can kind of connect with them and help them get access to this information?
Yeah, I would just add to that it's really important to understand again what your strengths are, and the strengths that local organizations have is that they can meet folks where they are because they have the flexibility to be able to do so. So lean into that flexibility. What does that allow you to do? It allows you to be able to have those one-on-one conversations that are much more supported and trusted. Again, they trust you as a resource, so lean into that. You can also put more resources in front of them that they're more likely to read because they're coming from a trusted resource. But then in terms of meeting people where they are, think out of the box and be a little bit unconventional about where folks are. Think about the season and the climate and the weather. Think about what's going on in local communities in terms of events, in terms of things that bring people out, like farmers markets. People want to be out a little bit more, so lean into that. Where are folks congregating, and where is a good opportunity to have these types of conversations with folks, which is probably most important. Tabling and visibility is always great for voters who are seasoned and just need to update their status. Maybe you can grab people as they're walking by, but then also you want to be able to kind of move around and be able to chat with people that are out and about.
Yeah, I would echo that. We want to make sure that voting is as accessible as possible. And I think building those connections and building that trust with folks is really important. I think we're very fortunate that we have a lot of spaces where clients feel we're already connected to clients. So a lot of folks at our health center are already seeing a case manager through CCH, or perhaps they live in one of the properties where we're doing voter registration. So we want to really bring that to them. And then, like I mentioned, for people who aren't already connected to us, we work with other nonprofit providers who are doing a lot of great innovative work. I mentioned the Safe Outdoor Spaces that's operating in Denver. That's a different way that they provide services to folks. And a lot of those people might not necessarily come to our health center to access voter registration. So we want to make sure that we can bring it to them. And then in terms of voter ID, that can definitely be a barrier. In Colorado, at least, a voter must provide ID if they haven't previously voted in Colorado, or if they haven't provided verifiable information on the application. So folks can list either a Colorado ID or driver's license or the last 4 digits of their social security number. So that is the way that they can get connected. And if they don't provide either of those, then they do have to bring some sort of ID to vote when they go in person. But fortunately, there's a pretty wide list, long list of different types of IDs. Some of them that I've actually never seen before and I didn't know existed. So Colorado is pretty good about the types of IDs that you can bring to register to vote.
Thanks, Andrew. And I just dropped the link to Vote Riders, which provides voter ID assistance resources in the chat. I'm seeing a question about informing people where to find information about candidates locally or federally. I know that Vote 411 is a really great resource where you can look up what's on your ballot. Cheyenne or Andrew, do you have any other recommendations for finding candidate information?
Yeah, that is a very localized resource. I would say start with your Department of State Elections, elections department. I'm probably saying that wrong. Start with their website because a lot of times they do link out to more localized resources. So that's a good place to start. It's also a trusted place to start. And then from there, social media is a really good place to find these candidate forums since a lot of organizations are promoting it as events. So one idea would be to look on your local events calendar for your community because organizations may be promoting there with some sort of listing with event details and then social media to accompany that as well.
Thank you. Question for Andrew. Someone asked about 16-year-olds. I know up on the slide you mentioned that 16-year-olds can register. Can you talk a little bit about that and pre-registration, what that looks like?
Yeah, so if you are obviously you can't vote until you are 18, but 16-year-olds can pre-register to vote, bringing all of the same information that anyone else would be required to bring, and then can be registered to vote when time comes and when they're 18 to get the mail-in ballot. So if you pre-register to vote in Colorado, you'll then receive that mail-in ballot when you become 18 and you're old enough to vote. And you can vote if you're 17, I believe, in the primary, if you will be 18 at the date of the general election as well. So that's good information to have as well.
Thanks, Andrew. And yeah, all of those rules will differ a little bit by state, but TurboVote, I'll plug that again, has that pre-register feature that people in any state can use between the age of 15 and 17. We got a really great question, and I see that people have been providing some peer support resources regarding this question in the chat. How to navigate assisting folks wanting to register to vote but fleeing domestic violence that require a higher level of confidentiality and anonymity than the usual process provides. Cheyenne or Andrew, is this something that you've encountered before?
Not recently for me. I can always share some resources. I know that is a very sensitive topic for privacy, so I can always pull some resources. The last I saw, Vote 411 had some great resources around that. And I also saw a few that were kind of floating through social media, so I can circle back and definitely share that.
Great. And I think there's something on the website of the National Network to End Domestic Violence. I'll see if I can pull that up as well when we're getting through some of the questions. But really, really great question.
Yeah, I
Also,
think one thing quickly that I try to do, obviously certain information that you provide is confidential, and that includes obviously social security number, your ID, your driver's license, date, month of birth, signature, that sort of thing. But I think one thing that helps is just letting people know what our process is and being as transparent as possible. So I let people know. A lot of people are worried about like where the form is actually going. When I sign this form, what do you do with it? And I let them know exactly what the process is. They all go in this folder, and then I bring it to our partners at CRC, and then they deliver those directly. And then with online registration as well, letting people know that it's secure, that we don't share any of that information outside of what you provide today. So.
great, thank you. We also got a question about Indigenous voter registration for tribal members, which I think people can often encounter many of those same issues with not having an address. Cheyenne or Andrew, is this something that you've encountered? I also know that the Native American Rights Fund does really fantastic work on Native voting rights, and I'm sure that they have some guidance as to this. I can try to drop that in the chat too.
So the recommendation for homeless voters or unhoused voters, rather, is to use a shelter address as their voting address where they can receive mail. You can also use a actual location, like a physical location, so that can be a street corner or a park in lieu of a home address. The federal form has a space for this purpose, so you may not actually see that on your state forms, but there are some options there. You don't have to have lived at that location for a long amount of time. Most states have some duration of residency requirement, which is usually about 30 days. But generally speaking, you could add in the address box, street corner of X and X coordinates, and you don't have to have a actual home address.
Thank you. Yeah, I will just say, seeing a few comments about this and tribal ID cards not being recognized. I know that'll be specific to state law, but definitely recommend getting in touch with the Native American Rights Fund because they are really the deepest experts in tribal voting rights.
Yeah, Colorado's fortunate. One of the acceptable ID types is a valid tribal ID. And then as we heard, we recommend people have a permanent address and then a place that they can receive mail as well.
Great. Someone asked a question about TurboVote tracking efforts to see the impact of work. That's a feature I neglected to mention. So within TurboVote, you can actually use a customized referral code for your campaign. If you want a custom referral code, you can reach out to me and I'll create one for you. And then that will actually enable you to see how many people registered. So let's say you want to send an email blast that includes the link to TurboVote. Reach out to me, I'll make you a referral code, and then check back with me and I can tell you, oh, 50 people registered to vote through that email blast, which is a pretty cool way to report on the impact that you're having. We have so many great questions. Um, we have about 3 minutes left and are definitely not going to have time for all of them. Let's see if we can take one more. Rachel asked about sharing with people about deadlines to register for states where you can't register and vote the same day. That will all depend on the state. They all have different deadlines, but you can use TurboVote or check directly with your state Board of Elections or Secretary of State's office, and they'll have all of those deadlines posted. Someone asked about ordering bulk registration forms in Pennsylvania. That's a question that you should be able to find on your Secretary of State's office. We also have a very close partner at the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania that has a lot of expertise here. So if you reach out to me, I can get you connected with them. Let's see. And then just one more time, we had someone ask about signing up to become a community partner. Hillary, if you wouldn't mind just sharing that link in the chat one more time to make sure that people leave with it. And I will try to save the remainder of the questions so we can get to them in future webinars. There are so many great questions, but luckily we have 13 more webinars in the series. So we will try to address them as much as possible in later weeks. With about 2 minutes left, I'm going to go through a few just opportunities to get involved beyond the webinar series. We've gone through a lot of great information here and want to make sure that we harness it beyond just being here and being in conversation on the webinar. We have a network of affiliates, which are nonpartisan organizations that are committed to carrying out the campaign's goals. If you're here and you share our mission, you're welcome to become an affiliate. We have regular office hours for the affiliates on Friday afternoons. We have an email listserv, and we'll have some enhanced access to those tools and resources like TurboVote. We can go to the next slide. We also have a housing providers council. So if you're with nonprofit or subsidized housing developer, property management, or resident services staff, you're welcome to join this group and attend the regular virtual meetings. This is really focused on voter engagement in subsidized housing for housing providers. So check it out if that describes you. We can go to the next slide. We talked about TurboVote. Here's that QR code that I mentioned. If you didn't grab the URL, you can scan that right here. And we also, as I mentioned, we can make custom URLs and custom QR codes for those campaigns if you want to track the outcome and see how many people registered through your outreach. So reach out to me if that's something that you're interested in doing. We can go to the next slide. And last but not least, or actually, I think this is last, might have one or two more slides. We have our next webinar on Monday, June 3rd. We'll feature some really fantastic partner organizations that you can work with. We will have Selena Gomez from Vote Riders, which we talked about a bit already, Dominique Espinosa from the Coalition on Human Needs, and Marcos Damian Nayola from Vote ER, which is doing really great voter engagement work in healthcare settings. We can go to the next slide. This is just a snapshot of all of the upcoming webinars. So again, if there's a topic we didn't cover today or a question we didn't answer, this is far from your last chance to get that question answered. We will be back roughly every other week through mid-November. Next slide. I think that brings us to the end. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you to Andrew and Chyann for taking the time to be here and for sharing such fantastic information. I'm gonna stay on for a few minutes to make sure I capture all of those questions and know that we can return to them in future weeks. And thank you all again. I'm going to take a few minutes to screenshot all the questions in the Q&A because I don't think they answer automatically and I don't think they save automatically. So you're welcome to all hop off, but the webinar isn't closing yet. Hillary and Lindsay, I think you can hop up if you'd like. I'm just kind of copying and pasting things. Thank you.
See you later.